What exactly is Valyrian Steel? How is it made? By magic, yes, but what magic? Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. On this channel we dive deep into George R. R. Martin's world of ice and fire, as well as The Lord of the Rings, The Witcher and more. Welcome. Valyrian Steel is one of the most valuable and useful materials in A Song of Ice and Fire. When forged into a sword, it is harder, sharper, lighter, and more long-lasting than even the finest castle-forged steel, and it's not even close. Darker than normal steel, with a beautiful swirling patterns shimmering on its surface, capable of holding colours in its depths and ornamenting the richest of surfaces, it is immensely valuable. Immeasurably more so, now that the secret of its creation has been lost. There will be no more new Valyrian steel. So the steel we do have is treasured. Maesters note down every single piece we know of, and the swords that exist are passed down as family heirlooms, given heroic names and often treated as legendary items. But what actually is it? Well, it is a metal, or more precisely an alloy. It is steel, but with added elements to its creation. This is what George R. R. Martin has said about it. The closest real-life analogue is Damascus steel, but Valyrian steel is a fantasy metal, which means it has magical characteristics, and magic plays a role in its forging. For those wondering what Damascus steel is, it's a steel forged hundreds of years ago and was often sold in Damascus, though probably not forged there. It had a distinctive pattern to it, often described as like flowing water, and gained a reputation for being incredibly strong and sharp. The secret to its manufacture is long lost. So that's what was in George R. R. Martin's mind when creating Valyrian Steel. But Valyrian Steel is obviously more than that, because it is magical. We get this summary from the Maesters in the world of Ice and Fire. The properties of Valyrian steel are well known, and are the result of both folding iron many times to balance and remove impurities, and the use of spells, or at least arts we do not know, to give unnatural strength to the resulting steel. Those arts are now lost, though the smiths of Qohor claim to still know magics for reworking Valyrian steel without losing its strength or unsurpassed ability to hold an edge. We'll come back to those Qohoric smiths later, because the first thing we should note about what makes Valyrian steel so special is actually not magical. We get lots of anecdotal descriptions throughout the story of how much time and effort and expertise goes into creating just one sword. Robb Stark talks about it being folded 1,000 times to remove impurities. Tyrion thinks of thousands of foldings. That slave master in Astapor trying to sell the Unsullied to Dany says that his slave soldiers are like Valyrian steel folded over and hammered for years on end. Everyone seems to accept that whatever magic was involved, there was also great dedication, time and craftsmanship. Which is all well and good, but George R. R. Martin said that there was magic involved in its forging, and it has magical properties too. That's what really sets it apart. And let's start with the forging. Marwyn the Mage tells us that all Valyrian sorcery was rooted in blood or fire, so we should probably start there. Fire is clearly something that the old Valyrians had a lot of to hand. Their main city was sitting on literal volcanoes, and they had their dragons too. We get one clue that perhaps dragons were involved in what Dany says to Jorah when he gives her his oath of fealty. She promises him a sword dragon-forged and made of Valyrian steel. Dany doesn't seem to be an expert on Valyrian history, but perhaps dragon-forged is more than just a pretty phrase. And perhaps Sam found something in an ancient tome. Jon recalls that Sam had told him that Longclaw had been forged in the fires of old Valyria, forged in dragon flame and set with spells. Dragon steel, Sam called it. So dragon fire seems to have been used, which is obviously the fire part. The blood part is presumably sacrifices in some way. George R. R. Martin's magic system is famously soft. He doesn't like to set out exactly how it works, but he is clear that sacrifice is needed. Magic requires some kind of sacrifice. Which actually brings us back to those Cahoric smiths, because we're given an account in the World of Ice and Fire of a maester who spent some time in Cohor with those smiths who retained more knowledge than anyone else about working Valyrian steel. We're told this. Maester Pohl's treatise on Cahoric metalworking, written during several years of residence in the Free City, reveals just how jealously the secrets are guarded. He was thrice publicly whipped and cast out from the city for making too many inquiries. The final time, his hand was also removed following the allegation that he stole a Valyrian steel blade. According to Pohl, the true reason for his final exile was his discovery of blood sacrifices, including the killing of slaves as young as infants, which the Cahoric smiths used in their efforts to produce a steel to equal that of the freehold. Which is rather gruesome, but probably quite instructive. If anywhere, except perhaps the Citadel, knows some elements of how to make Valyrian steel, it is Cohor, and if they are using blood sacrifices in an effort to replicate what the Valyrians did, that is strongly suggestive that they were used in the original. So dragonfire, blood sacrifice, and spells, apparently. Lots of spells. Several characters refer to Valyrian steel swords as spell-forged, and when Tobbo Mott, a Cahoric smith who had moved to King's Landing, refashions the sword Ice into two smaller swords, he says he worked 100 spells, trying, and only partially succeeding, to change its colour. As an intriguing aside here, Tobbo Mott's apprentice was none other than Gendry until he was spirited out of the city, so it's possible that he picked up some of the secrets to Valyrian steel. We'll have to see whether that plays a role in the story. And while we're talking of other people who might or must know some of the secrets, the Citadel definitely knows quite a lot. Those maesters who study the higher mystery receive a Valyrian steel link in their maester's chain, which means that the Citadel must have both a store of Valyrian steel themselves and knowledge of how to shape it into a link for a chain. So blood sacrifice, magic spells, and dragon flame are all involved in the process of making Valyrian steel. And maybe something else, so we'll cycle back around to this, and look at what magical qualities it has. Again, some are obvious. We're told countless times that nothing keeps an edge like a Valyrian steel sword. They are all centuries old and still apparently the sharpest, strongest and lightest swords around. They don't need the constant repair that other swords do, and because of the weight advantage, an average strength fighter could wield a much larger weapon and deal more damage. In the hands of a skilled fighter, they were deadly. All of which is very impressive, but basically just makes them very good weapons, not super magical. They don't come with bonus electrical damage or generate defensive energy fields or anything like that. They fit well within the low fantasy feel of the early part of A Song of Ice and Fire. But there is more, surely. Two things present themselves. First, Valyrian steel is fire-resistant, and not just a little bit, but as an example, when Aegon the Conqueror's body was burned on a pyre lit by Vhagar's flames, the sword Blackfire was burned with him. When the pyre burned down, the sword emerged a little bit darker in colour, but otherwise completely unharmed. How might this play out in the story? Well, there is indisputably a lot of talk of flaming swords. Thoros of Myr uses one, though it's made clear that when the fire burns down, the blade itself is useless. That wouldn't be an issue with Valyrian steel blades. And of course, there is Lightbringer, the legendary sword of Aora High. That is a fiery sword. Melisandre has made one for Stannis, but Maester Aemon notes that it can't be the real Lightbringer, as it isn't a real flame, so maybe we are yet to see that. The other thing that Valyrian steel seems to magically be able to do is kill others. We haven't seen that yet in the books, but we do have that reference in an ancient text that Sam dug up about dragon steel that is probably a reference to Valyrian steel. So Valyrian steel has two magical properties that both relate to killing others. At which point, let's get a little speculative, because although George R. R. Martin hasn't told us the details of how Valyrian steel is made or what it is intended to be used for, he has given us a lot of moving parts that all seem to fit together and move in one direction. The other substance that we know works against the others, because we've seen it work, is dragonglass. That is darker than steel and more naturally sharp, but also very brittle. Might that somehow be a part of the mix for making Valyrian steel? It seems very possible, and with old Valyria being atop all those volcanoes, it would probably have been in plentiful supply. And perhaps it answers the question of what help the last hero got from the Children of the Forest. If you remember, that particular legend of the First Long Night has him hunting for the children, hoping they could provide some magical assistance against the others who humanity were defenceless against. He eventually found them, and they did help. This was a turning point, we're told. In the later Battle for the Dawn, the others were defeated. What made the difference? Well, as Sam says, I found one account of the Long Night that spoke of the last hero slaying others with a blade of dragon steel. Supposedly they could not stand against it. Dragon steel? John frowned. Valyrian steel? That was my first thought as well. So, a plain text reading of the legends must surely be that the last hero could not stand against the others, and then the children let him into some secret, after which he starts fighting the others with the Valyrian steel sword, and the others are defeated. Which of course ties into the other great legendary figure of the Long Night, Aora High. His legend, or at least the part of his legend we've been told, is notable in the way that it focuses in on him trying to forge a hero's sword. It clearly isn't a normal sword because it needs both time and skill. The final sword needed 100 days and nights of work, as well as magic and fire. He forged it in the sacred fires of a temple, and blood sacrifice. He tempered it by killing his own wife, Nisa. It sounds very much like the ingredients of Valyrian steel. Was the first Valyrian steel made in the Long Night with magic, fire, blood, and perhaps dragonglass in an effort to create a weapon that might work against the others? As I said, we're well into the realms of speculation here, but it undeniably all fits together. Which leads us to the inevitable question of, if this is going to be so important, with the others approaching once more, where are all the Valyrian steel swords? At the moment, there is just one Valyrian steel sword at the wall, Longclaw. They will need a lot more than that. I'll cover that in the next video. But what do you think? What's your theory about what Valyrian steel actually is? Let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to see more videos like this, my A Song of Ice and Fire playlist is on the left of your screen now. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon on the right of your screen now. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.